Planning on visiting Mammoth Hot Springs on your Yellowstone National Park trip? Here's what you need to know before you go in order to make the most of it. Hey there, I'm Alex from Alex on the Map, and growing up in Montana meant I have spent some time in Yellowstone, and I've been to Mammoth Hot Springs a number of different times. To be honest, I didn't really get what all the fuss was about because I was a bookworm when I was younger and not really interested in what was around the Yellowstone area at all. But as an adult, I love Yellowstone, and it's one of my very favorite places to revisit, and Mammoth Hot Springs is no exception. However, you might recognize that it's a pretty cool sight to see, but you might not know why, and you might not know which spots are the best bang for your buck. This video is going to go into a little bit of detail about which terraces you're going to want to see, as well as some tips and FAQs to help you make the most of your time there. One quick tip before we get started is I recommend you stay in the town of Gardner if you are planning your Yellowstone trip, just because that gives you a 15-minute drive to Mammoth Hot Springs in the early morning. I'm going to share a quick map of the Mammoth Hot Springs area just so you can get a sense of where each of the terraces are located and what you should see in which area. I recommend pausing this video and taking a screenshot or heading to the blog post I've linked to in the description below. That'll give you more time to familiarize yourself with the map and to know where you're going. Alright, let's get to the main attraction. The Mammoth Hot Springs terraces are the main event and why you probably are heading to this area to begin with. This area is divided into three main areas: the lower terraces, the main terrace, and the upper terraces. Each has a slightly different feel to it, and even though it may take a little bit more time in order to see them all, they each do have a reason to spend a little bit longer at them. You're probably going to start out at the lower terraces and work your way up to the upper terraces, stopping at the main terrace in between. Do keep in mind that there are some stairs and there is a bit of an incline, so it might not be the easiest if you are mobility impaired. Not saying it isn't worth a little extra effort if you can do it, but if you can't, it may be worth it just to go to the upper terraces where everything is wheelchair accessible. We're going to start with the lower terraces, and I'm going to include some top spots that you're going to want to stop at, plus some of my favorites as well. First and foremost, you're not going to miss the Liberty Cap, which is located just at the start of the boardwalk on the lower terraces. Named after a peasant's cap, it's also considered a similar shape to something else I'm sure you can imagine. Though it did receive its namesake from the Hayden Geological Survey in 1871. You can't miss it. You really can't. It's just right there. The other main attraction on the lower terraces is the Mound and Jupiter Terrace. Most likely when you see pictures of Mammoth Hot Springs from photographers, this is what you're likely going to see. If you are a photographer, I highly recommend going in the morning just because the bright orange colors are going to be a lot more vibrant for you. And it's definitely worth making a stop whether you're a photographer or not, just to get an idea of how amazing these geological formations are. Other terraces you are likely to see include the Opal Terrace, the Minerva Spring, which is one of my favorites, the Cleopatra Terrace, and Powlett Spring. From there, you're going to work your way up some stairs until you reach the main terrace. One of the reasons I recommend visiting Mammoth Hot Springs in the morning is because you are likely to see some steam covering the top of the main terrace, and it just makes for a really eerie and beautiful sight. There's a lot to see here and a lot of different springs, which is why I usually spend the majority of my time when I'm visiting Mammoth Hot Springs in this area. I'm going to include a list of the terraces and springs you can see, as well as some of my very favorites. You can see the New Blue Spring, Cupid Spring, which is one of my faves, Grassy Spring, Trail Spring, Canary Spring, another favorite, and Dryad Springs. This is another spot where the boardwalk might be a little busier, so just take your time and be patient when it comes to seeing these different terraces. Finally, you're going to head to the upper terraces, which include some really interesting formations up there. One quick tip I have for you too is if you don't feel like walking all the way up the stairs in order to see these, you can actually drive to the upper terraces as well for a little scenic drive, and then continue on as a little loop, and you'll be able to see everything up there without having to walk up there. Here are some of the terraces you can find up there, as well as my recommendations. You can find Prospect Spring, New Highland Terrace, Orange Spring Mound, one of my faves, Bath Lake, White Elephant Back Terrace, another fave, Angel Terrace, and Highland Terrace. One of the highlights I think is the White Elephant Back Terrace, just because it actually looks like what it says it is. Basically how it was formed is there was a crack in the Earth's crust and water came up and formed this amazing formation that looks like you're looking down the length of an elephant back. I also recommend stopping at the Orange Mound Spring just for its beautiful orange colors as well. The great thing about the upper terraces is you can pretty much see everything within a fairly short period of time, so it's definitely worth making that loop. Alright, I'm going to chat a little bit about the Mammoth Springs Historic District just because that is part of the Mammoth Springs area. Again, this is not the main attraction, but if you have plenty of time to explore Yellowstone, it might be worth a stop. Also, if you're planning on grabbing some lunch or dinner, there are some options here as well. First and foremost, if you want to spend time in the historic district, you should stop at the Albright Visitor Center. Not only is it the center of where you will find out information on the early days of the park, but you can also pick up fishing permits, get some more information about the trails, and a lot more. You shouldn't have any trouble finding it, but if you do want to know its location, it is right across from the Mammoth Hot Springs Hotel. It's also a good spot to grab Wi-Fi if you happen to not have service in this area. If you are into history, another activity you might want to do in this area is Fort Yellowstone. I definitely recommend downloading the audio guide of this attraction from the NPS app, and you start at the Albright Visitor Center and work your way through some of the buildings that were built there in the early days before the Park Service really existed at all. In fact, the US didn't really know what to do with this, especially since there was poaching and people taking geological formations and it was just a mess. So they had the US Cavalry taking care of the park during this time, and this is where their barracks were and they stayed. I wouldn't list it as like a top thing to do in Yellowstone, but if you have the extra time and history is just fascinating to you, then it's definitely worth a stop. Alright, here are some of my tips for visiting Mammoth Hot Springs in order to help you make the most of your time there. First of all, I would recommend wearing some sturdy shoes, and even though it is not a trail per se, the boardwalk is better when you have some closed-toe shoes and you're not wearing sandals or flip-flops. And while most of it's even, it can be a little rickety, so having that extra stability can help a lot. If you haven't done some research into leave no trace principles, I highly recommend you do that anytime you spend time in the outdoors. This spot is notorious for having people jump off the boardwalk and onto the formations, including a certain James Bond who did it last year. And there's a reason why those guardrails and all that exists, is we want to protect those formations for future generations to come. It's also highly dangerous. The water there can be very hot and you can suffer actual burns, so it's better just to stay on the boardwalk and stay where you're supposed to go. Another thing to consider is don't just stop at Mammoth Hot Springs. There is a lot of really great stuff within this region that maybe you would skip over on your Yellowstone itinerary. Norris Geyser Basin is located not that far away, and there are some great hikes in the area too that you might want to check out if you are into hiking. I also recommend taking your nice camera if you're a photographer and heading there when the light is good. Just because these formations are so photogenic and well worth getting up a little early in order to get that shot. Alright, here are some commonly asked questions I get about visiting Mammoth Hot Springs. Where is Mammoth Hot Springs located? Mammoth Hot Springs is at the northernmost part of Yellowstone National Park. It's a quick jump from Gardner, Montana, so if you're staying there, it is really easy to get to. And I'm going to put up a map real quick so you can see where it is in relation to everything else in the park. Can you swim in Mammoth Hot Springs? As mentioned earlier, please do not leave the boardwalk. Not only are you risking injury to yourself, but an injury to the formations, but no, you cannot swim in the hot springs. There are other hot springs outside of the park for that. In fact, Yellowstone is pretty strict about where you can and cannot swim, so you're going to want to do a little bit of research into that if that's on your bucket list. How far away is Mammoth Hot Springs from Old Faithful? Mammoth Hot Springs is about an hour-and-a-half drive from Old Faithful, depending on weather, traffic, and of course if there are animals on the road. Anytime you are traveling throughout Yellowstone, I recommend being super flexible because you just never know if something will come up. The other day while we were driving through there, we actually had an accident ahead of us and we waited around for 2 hours for it to get cleared up. So you just never know with so many people and wildlife what's going to happen. How close is Mammoth Hot Springs to Bozeman? Similarly, Mammoth Hot Springs is about an hour and a half from Bozeman, again depending on the weather, any wildlife on the road, and how busy that main entrance is at the north. How close is Roosevelt Arch to Mammoth Hot Springs? Roosevelt Arch is at most about a 15-minute drive from Mammoth Hot Springs, and also depending on how long of a line there is to get into the park at the north entrance. Are there places to eat near Mammoth Hot Springs? There are a few spots in the area where you can grab a quick lunch or a dinner on your Yellowstone itinerary. Do keep in mind that because the town of Gardner is so close at about 15 minutes away, there are a lot more options there than there are within the park. However, there is the Mammoth Terrace Grill and the Mammoth Hotel Dining Room as dining options within the area. If you would like coffee or a drink later in the afternoon, the Mammoth Hotel Map Room Bar is also an option for you. Likewise, are there any places to stay in the Mammoth Hot Springs area? Again, as mentioned, Gardner will probably be a better bet for you because it is only 15 minutes away and there are a lot more accommodation options. But the Mammoth Hot Springs Hotel is also available, but do keep in mind that it tends to book up very quickly, especially during those peak summer months. Also keep in mind there is a campground available as well. The Mammoth Campground offers tent camping and RV camping too. I hope this has helped you plan your trip to Mammoth Hot Springs and answered any questions you might have. If you have any more though, feel free to drop them in the comments and I'll get right back to you on that. Also, before you leave, hit that subscribe button and the bell notification for more videos on Yellowstone National Park and the other national parks in the system.